Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Wa ba'd. Picture this. Someone comes to you and asks, I'm planning to start a school. Which curriculum should I use? And I can bet you that most of you will suggest some curriculum which you think is a good one. IB or IGCSE or the American curriculum or this or that. However, if the same person were to ask you, I'm planning to build a factory, which machinery would be the best? You will never say, buy from Cummins or Wärtsilä or Volvo or Caterpillar or John Deere or whatever. You will ask, what is the factory for? What are you planning to produce? Now, think of a school like a factory. What is the factory for? What is the product? Because everything in that factory depends on that single definition. What do you want to produce? The kind of building, the design, the machinery, the raw material, the people you hire, the skills you want and need, the pay structure, you name it, everything depends on what that factory is for. People working in a toilet paper factory do not get paid the same wages, do not have the same skills, they don't make the same amount of money as people working in a factory which is manufacturing aircraft engines. Not because toilet paper is not important. You know what happened when the first time COVID hit this country? They did not run out of aircraft engines, they ran out of toilet paper. It's not a question of what is important. The question is, what is it you are producing? What is it you are building? Everything depends on that. Now think of a school like a factory. What's the factory for? What's the product? And as I said, everything depends on that. So how many of us ask this question before we talk about the curriculum, the syllabus, teachers, or anything else in a school? And that's like suggesting to somebody to buy this machinery or that machinery without knowing what they are going to produce in the factory. It's a dumb question, and it's an even worse dumb answer. So I want to ask you, what is the goal? What is your goal? As an owner of a school, as a principal of a school, as a teacher in a school, what is your goal? What does the final product look like? What must he or she be able to do? Do you have that defined for your school? If you have it defined, where is it? Who knows this? How do you monitor results? What are your metrics? Because the reality is that what you don't measure, you don't know. What you don't measure, you cannot improve. What you don't know, you cannot control or guarantee. In the words of Michael Harry, the designer of Motorola Six Sigma quality program, he said, if you want to see what someone values, see what they measure. And believe me, never were more wiser words spoken. We claim to value time and we say time is money, but we waste time, not money. Because what do we measure? Any business has two players, sellers and buyers, suppliers and consumers, providers and beneficiaries. Call them what you want, two players. My question to you is, who are your consumers, your beneficiaries, your buyers? The success of the business depends on how well the beneficiaries like the service or products. Successful businesses constantly seek customer satisfaction, customer opinion. In GE, we used to call it VOC, Voice of the Customer. These would be meetings where customers were invited to speak to GE executives about their experience in dealing with whichever GE business they were the customers of. The job of the executives was simply to listen respectfully, ask questions to clarify and solve problems, never to justify or give excuses. It was a highly effective process, and I believe it was one of the major reasons for customer retention and loyalty. My question to you is, school owners and teachers, do you do this? Do you seek customer feedback? Who is your customer? Who do you talk to? When did you do it last? What did they say? Did you record that? Then what changes did you make? And what was the result of those changes? If you can't answer all of these questions, then it's worthless. Because what you don't measure, you don't know. What you don't measure, you cannot control or guarantee. What you don't measure, you cannot improve. It's as simple as that. Next question. Who is this school for? Who is any school for? And I'm sure you will say children. And I will say to you, really? You really believe that? Then why do you have parent-teacher meetings? Where are the children in these meetings? And if they are present, what's their role? Seriously, let's make our schools truly for the children only. Not use children as an excuse for owners and teachers and administrative staff and a whole host of others to make money in a way that's convenient and easy for them, not necessarily for the children. Let's create a system where the one who was getting paid to teach passes or fails for succeeding or failing to teach. We apply this rule in everything in life except schools. The lives and careers of children are ruined because they had incompetent or disinterested teachers. But those teachers still got their salaries and they got their increments and they got their bonuses. Is this fair or even moral? How can we sleep in peace? Here's a quiz. It's an easy quiz. What do you call a place where inmates come in and the gate is shut and they cannot leave until the gate is opened at the end of their time in that facility? What do you call that institution? What do you call the institution where inmates are segregated by age, as if the date of manufacture is the most important thing about a human being? They are seated in rows behind rows behind rows, so that the second row onwards, each inmate gets to look at the back of somebody's head all day long. Now, how inspiring is that? Inmates are not allowed to speak at will or to anyone other than the authority, and that only after taking permission. They are not allowed to disagree. Dissent is seen as rebellion and treated accordingly. Every decision that affects the inmates is taken by the authorities, and the inmates are not consulted about any decision, even though every decision affects them. Any tendency to try to become independent, to question authority, to suggest improvements, to promote responsibility is seen as evil and punished. In short, all life skills that are necessary to succeed in society, in careers, in marriages, like teamwork and conflict resolution skills and scenario planning and communication and influencing, decision making and leadership, are not taught at all, and where they emerge despite not being taught are eradicated. The time of the inmates while they are in the facility is strictly regulated with punishment for not following the rules, all of which are imposed upon them, upon the inmates, without their voice or choice. What time they eat or sleep or play or work are all regulated and have nothing to do whether they want to do any of those things at those stated times. Inmates are not even allowed the freedom to go to the toilet without the humiliation of asking permission publicly. In India, at the school I went to, and I know all the same thing for all the schools, you raised your hand and you said this, and that meant you just meant to go for the small job, and if it was the big job, then you said this, which meant the big job. Inmates spend specific period of time in each activity and break, which they are informed of. They are informed about this break or this activity by ringing bells or buzzers. They and their teachers included are not even considered responsible enough to look at a watch and go to the next activity or the next class or to take a break. Interestingly, nobody objects. That's the level of conditioning where the person doesn't even consider himself to be worthy of being treated with respect. That's great for all dictators because where there is no dissatisfaction, there can be no rebellion. Inmates are tested, supposedly for knowledge, by their ability to random recall discrete, disconnected bits of information during a specific time window. If someone is unable to recall a bit of information that they were asked about in that window but does that 5 minutes after the bell rings, he has failed the test. Depending on the level of this test, it can mean the difference literally between life and death. It's not for nothing that you have so many student suicides. We are the people who created that condition where that child took his life. And this is called a test of knowledge. But it's a test of memory alone, without any understanding about how the bits of information are connected or can be used. It's an exercise without any understanding even of the circumstances of the child when he or she came to that class. They could have come from a home which was highly disturbed. They could have come facing a tragedy. They could have come from any situation. In normal circumstances, that child would have probably breezed through that examination. Even though it's a rotten examination of nothing but memory, but still they had the memory to do that. But because that particular day they came from an environment which completely blanked out their minds, they're unable to answer a question, and you condemn them for life. You know and I know, depending on the situation, depending on that exam, they can or cannot, they will or will not be qualified even to enter a university or to get a job or whatever the case might be, and that's why some of them commit suicide. Now ask, who's responsible for that suicide? It's an exercise in collecting dots, not in connecting them. And we have the temerity to call it education. Finally, during this test, if any inmate seeks help or responds to a call for help from another inmate, they are punished. Individual, even toxic competition is encouraged and rewarded, and teamwork is suppressed and penalized. That's great news for all the HR consultants who run team building workshops. If we didn't spend 14 years or 16 years of a student's life in school conditioning them never to work together as a team, all those consultants would have had no job. Now, what do you call this institution? I'm sure you will say either a jail or a school, and you will be right in both cases. Jails and schools, nothing else. Our schools and our corporate organizations are the most totally autocratic systems in the world, which is why we have oligarchies masquerading as democracies. And we have dictatorial national leaders who are so popular. And nobody questions any of this. None of this is surprising because it all begins in the schools, and which are run on the lines of prisons. And we are responsible. Naturally, all the oppressed therein, in that system called a school, have one single goal in life: to be able to give orders instead of obeying them. The only system they know is the autocratic prison model, and they are all aspiring jailers. Talk to any corporate head about collaboration, about employee participation in decision making, electing bosses instead of the boss being imposed on them top down, encouraging dissent and questioning, and all such symbols of self-respect and personal authority and freedom, and you see a hunted look come into his eyes. And if you listen carefully, you can hear a whirring sound interspersed with squeaks. That is his terrified brain desperately trying to find escape routes to this highly threatening conversation. Incidentally, unless like me, you are also among the exalted ranks of the voluntarily unemployable, don't ask such questions, or you will learn the meaning of the ejection seat, perhaps too graphically. Now, what kind of schools do we really need? To answer that, let's look at society, because schools are the birthplace for those who will mold and change and manage and rule society. So ask, what kind of society do we want to live in? Factor yourself into the equation because it is about you. Before we go there, let's be clear that education and schooling are two different things and not always compatible with each other. And that's why Mark Twain said, I have never allowed schooling to come in the way of my education. And was he right? For those who understand Urdu, we have a word called Musaqqaf, Sahibus Saqafat. It used to mean somebody who was noble and honorable and principled and learned and courageous and chivalrous and all such good qualities. Today it merely means somebody who is literate. That is how we have gutted the whole idea of education. We have reduced it to a means of learning how to earn a living alone. Whereas education was supposed to be for life, by creating responsible citizens, not merely as a means to earn a living. The thirst for knowledge, the freedom to seek it, and the understanding how to apply it, how to apply the learning, are all not part of what we call schooling. And the results are painfully obvious, painfully visible. I submit to you that education is not the responsibility of schools and teachers alone, but must be a partnership in parenting between parents, teachers, and children. All three are stakeholders and must have a say in what happens. Parenting can't be outsourced. You can't pay somebody to raise your children just as you can't pay somebody to diet on your behalf. If it is yours, you raise it. The school is your partner, but only you are the parent. The teacher is not your substitute. She or he is your resource, your help, but only you are the parent. Jannah is beneath your feet, O mother, not the teachers. And you, dear father, are the door of Jannah for your child, not the teacher. If you want the privilege, you must pay the price. Comes with the territory. Education must therefore create individuals who are noble and kind and compassionate and learned and principled, have excellent manners, have courage, they have the ability to think, to analyze, to communicate, to lead by example, and are aware of their accountability to the one from whom nothing is hidden and to whom is our return. Reading and writing and learning different kinds of information and so on is one facet of education. It's not its purpose. We must give importance to it, sure, but only as one of the elements in education, not to the exclusion of everything else. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, focused on only two things in his tarbiyah, in his raising, in his educating of his Sahaba, his companions. Those two things, those two principles guided every decision and every action that they took. First one, developing taqwa. Taqwa is the concern to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in everything we say or do without exception. It is the fear of displeasing the one we love the most. It's not fear of Allah, as it is wrongly translated, but it's fear of displeasing Allah because we love Him the most. The more we know Him, the more we love Him, the more we fear to displease Him. And that situation, that quality, that condition, that emotion is called taqwa. And that comes from knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having a relationship with Him Jalla Jalaluhu, and being aware of His presence in our lives at all times. How do we develop that in our children? How do we measure progress? And since only a lighted lamp can light another, what's the situation with our teachers and our parents? Their taqwa, our taqwa. If we are dead, we can't light those lamps. What are our metrics to assess ourselves? Just to give you one pointer, look at your income and what you eat. If these two are not halal, it doesn't matter what else you do. There is no taqwa to speak of. How can parents who earn haram and eat and feed their children haram expect to raise children who are muttaqoon, who are people of taqwa? How is this going to happen? Second element that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he focused on, the first one was taqwa, the second one was akhlaq, character. It begins with how we treat children and, and those who have less power than we do. As they see, so they do. Children listen with their eyes. They don't care what you say until they see what you do. If you treat them like they are incapable of being responsible, incapable of self-regulation, incapable of planning and executing those plans, of working together in teams, which they form and pick leaders for, that's exactly what will happen. They will be incapable of all these things. By all means, guide them, but there's a world of difference between guiding and directing. If you have a doubt, ask, what happens if they decide not to follow my guidance, but to arrive at the result by a different route? The goal is not negotiable, but the route doesn't need to be. Also ask, what happens if they ask why they should do this task, or how it is likely to help them in life? Believe me, if you can't answer that question, then ask why the child should learn what you want him or her to learn when even you don't know why. Akhlaq are tested in how we deal with conflict and difference of opinion. Can we disagree without being disagreeable? How do we treat dissent? Do we accept it, encourage it, use it as an asset to drill down more deeply and analyze a situation from all aspects? Or do we suppress it and treat it as rebellion and treason and destroy the dissenter? How we treat dissent is a hallmark of whether we are civilized or not. 2.1, which is part of the same akhlaq of building character, which the Prophet ﷺ did with his companions, the Sahaba, was developing collaborative decision making. The Majlis al-Shura. Remember, he was dealing with people who were used to a tribal environment where the word of the chief was law. The chief consulted who he wanted, if he wanted, when he wanted, how he wanted, and if he didn't want, he didn't consult them. But when he stated something, do this, and it was done. If it wasn't done, you paid a price. To that kind of society, he brought Majlis al-Shura, he brought collaborative decision making. Of course, as we know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed this, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam practiced it. We see evidence of this in major decisions like the battles of Badr and Uhud. We see how he took the advice of his Sahaba, of his companions, in Sulh Hudaybiyah, in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. He took the advice of his wife, our mother, Salama radiallahu anha. And in the battle of Ahzab, he took the advice of Salman al-Farsi radiallahu anhu. And there are many other instances in the seerah, but these will suffice for now. The final culmination of this was in the fact that he did not nominate his successor. No matter our opinions about that today, but the fact remains that he did not name anyone. In my view, this was because of two things. He knew who they would pick, and that was the one he wanted to succeed him, and that was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. And that's what happened. And secondly, because he wanted them to come to that decision on their own, so that they would then support the successor. Now, this is the ultimate test in your own training, in your own ability. Sure, there is or there was a risk in this case that their choice may have been different from his. But that's the risk that every coach takes, and which is really a test of his coaching. The coach is never on the field, but no coach worth the name will put untrained players on the field and expect them to win. And no coach will ever train his team in one game and expect them to play a totally different game which they never learned and in which everything they learned results in a penalty. So if they do what you taught them, they suffer. Yet, that's precisely what we do in our schools. We condition children to unquestioning obedience, to blindly obey authority, never to decide anything on their own, but to bow in submission to whatever is imposed from on high, no matter how stupid and inconvenient or unfair it may be. We condition them to value internal competition and engage in internal competition between each other, no matter how toxic, and to distrust and punish collaboration and teamwork, to show up the faults of each other and to snitch on our colleagues and friends and neighbors. And then we expect them to do the opposite of all this and create a society that is compassionate and just and non-discriminatory and collaborative and kind and caring. We expect them to stand up to oppression and to question authority. We expect them to vote good people into power and bad people out. In short, we expect from them the opposite of all that we taught and conditioned them to do. I know this is a sign of insanity, but you tell me on whose part. Let me ask you, what do you think will happen if you give those who are affected by the rules, that is the children, the opportunity to make the rules? What do you think will happen? Seriously, ask this question. After all, that's what democracy and freedom is all about, isn't it? When are children supposed to learn to use democracy and freedom, to value it, to deal with problems that may arise, and to practice it responsibly? When are they supposed to learn all this? You're saying to yourself, all this is very well, but where does it happen? Is it even practical? So let me tell you a story. A true story, my story. It was 1990 and I was the manager of Newmari Estates in Kanyakumari district in Tamil Nadu in South India. That consisted of 2 very large estates, 2 factories and a school. The Arunachalam Higher Secondary School was a co-educational school with 1,200 students and 75 staff. 72 teachers and 2 or 3 support staff. The students came from very poor families who survived on subsistence agriculture and any manual labor that they could get. In the evenings, the men would get drunk and domestic violence was a major social evil. Alcoholism and domestic violence, big problems. When these children, who the previous night saw their mother being beaten up by their father, and this was the norm in their homes, and they probably got beaten up as well. When they came to the school and they encountered discrimination and ill treatment from teachers, also at school, you can imagine what that did to their confidence and enthusiasm for learning. But education was their only lifeline out of that society. But sadly, they were not getting it, despite all the money that the trust had invested in the school. The medium of instruction was Tamil, but English language was taught as a subject in the curriculum. The school was partially aided by the government of Tamil Nadu in the form of salaries of some subject teachers, while the Arunachalam Trust funded everything else, including all capital expenditure to build and maintain all buildings and infrastructure. When I first visited the school to take stock of what was in store for me, I saw that it was built on about 2 acres of land and had nice, spacious classrooms with plenty of light and ventilation. But the walls were covered with graffiti, and the grounds were like a massive garbage dump with paper and plastic and trash everywhere. The children were in the dumps as regards academic work, to which the board exam results amply bore witness. But on their feet they were very agile. A little observation showed me why. It seemed to me that the teachers operated on the principle that if you would get your hands on a child, you must beat him. Now you may say, well, why beat the child if he did not do anything? The answer is, he did not do anything right then, but then he may have done something that you had not seen, or he would do something in the future. So beat him. It's good for him. The relationship between the students and teachers was adversarial. I spent a couple of days in the school trying to get as much data by direct observation as I could. And then I requested the headmaster to call a staff meeting for me to address. Now, that's another story by itself, which I won't tell you now. But after that staff meeting, I introduced the practice of a weekly staff meeting, which I said that I would attend. Now, strictly speaking, that was not what I would have recommended to anyone in my position, because it is the job of the headmaster to get things done. But after seeing what the state of the school was, I decided that he needed strong support. We would meet every Monday in the last class period. I did not want to detain teachers after school, as it would be difficult for them to take their normal bus home. The meeting was work, and so we did it during normal working hours. They appreciated that, and that made the meetings more productive. Then a couple of weeks later, I asked for a general student assembly, and I met the whole school. After the usual spiel about improving the school and so on, I did two things which got them to sit up and listen. I introduced myself and I said, my name is Mirza Yavar Beg and I am the new correspondent of your school. I want to know what you think about this school so that we can make it a place that you love to come to. Tell me, are you happy in the school? There was complete silence, dead silence. They looked at each other, they looked at the teachers, they looked at me as if to say, do you think we are fools? Do you really think that you are going to get us to answer this question? Do you think that you can talk this stuff and we will believe you and tell you what we feel? Then go fly a kite, Mr. So-and-so, whatever your name is. That is what was going on in their minds. I could see all of this in the faces of those sitting in the front row, and I knew that they represented the rest. I said to them, I want you to elect a class representative who will be a member of the student council which I am going to set up. Your class representative will represent you, so do it carefully. I am giving you 1 hour of free time starting now. I want the class representatives to meet me for our first student council meeting in 1 hour. And I walked away. It's amazing how many things we think, mostly negative, that we believe, or at least our teachers and adults believe them, about children. I had not given them any instructions about how to conduct the election. I'm not saying that it was done totally fairly or efficiently, or that every single child had a chance to exercise his or her choice. All I know that from the noise and the activity and the energy that suddenly came into these people, that whoever was elected in 1 hour was somebody with innate leadership ability. It took a bit longer than 1 hour, but we had our first meeting. I set the ground rules. I said to them, the student council will be comprised of class representatives from each class who will be appointed for a period of 1 term, which is 4 months. This is so that many of you, this is so that as many of you as possible get to experience being leaders. Class representatives can be re-elected for a second term, but then they must sit out 2 terms before standing for election again. The student council will also have 3 teachers as honorary non-voting members. Their role will be advisory to provide information and support for whatever the student council decides to do, but they will not direct. And the student council is free to disregard their advice if they don't want to follow it. And these teachers also will change every 2 terms so that they can provide continuity. The student council will decide how this school is run. Any questions? Hand shot up. I was very happy because questions indicate interest. Sir, what do you mean? How the school will be run? I said, I mean start and end times, when the school begins, when the school ends, holidays, class duration, whatever you want. It is your school, and from now on, you will decide how it will be run. Remember what I asked you in the assembly? Are you happy with the school as it is? I meant it, even though you didn't believe me. Now they all looked here and there, and strange looks all around, and some teachers looked at me with pity, some smirked, all looked highly doubtful. The students just deadpanned me. I knew what was going on, as I had done other similar initiatives before, and I know how it works. The first response to all change initiatives is suspicion. People find it difficult to believe that the very people that they had been dealing with for a long time can change their behavior completely. They don't believe this is possible. The solution is consistency and persistence. Announce what you are going to do and do it without worrying about reactions. Once people see you behaving in congruence with what you stated, they come around and realize that you are sincere and will start trusting you. But this takes time. And it's important for you as the change agent not to react to anything they say or do. People listen with their eyes. They do not care what you say until they see what you do. In this case, the children had gotten used to being abused and treated without respect. For them to believe that teachers would not beat them anymore, that they would not only be treated with respect, but here was the highest authority in their school telling them that henceforth the school would be run according to their wishes, was simply too much to swallow. So they waited and watched. I asked them, I persisted. I said, are you happy with the school now? Are you happy with how the school is run now? And I said, look, you can tell me, all of us here, the teachers, your principal, your headmaster, and I, we really want to know. And nothing will happen to you, whatever you say. Nobody will get a prize, and nobody will be punished. And you have my word for it. I got some tentative responses from the front rows because by now they had gotten used to me. So somebody said, no, we don't like the school as it is. Now, I left it at that. I didn't push them to give me more details. I knew what they wanted to say, and I also knew that they would not say it then. Not yet. That there was even this first response was not a credit to me, but showed me the desperate situation that the students were in. They needed to change. They needed to change, and I was determined that I would change it. So I said, good. Now you get to change that. You get to change all that you didn't like. So do what you think will make this school the best school in Tamil Nadu. And that's what I want, the best school in the state. Do whatever you want. In the next week's meeting, I said to them, I want you to suggest to me what you would like to change to make this school the best school in Tamil Nadu. I knew that for them, even to think of themselves like that in those terms was a stretch, was a huge stress. But if they started thinking of themselves in their school as theirs, they would start taking pride in it. And if that happened, the rest would be easy and inevitable. It all starts with a thought, which kindles desire, which produces the energy. Direct that into the channels of strategy and you achieve the goal. I told them that I would attend their weekly meeting and that they could meet as often as they wanted and at any time they wanted. I set some ground rules. I told them that if they identified a problem, I also wanted them to think it through and suggest a solution that we could apply. I didn't want them to become professional objectors or professional protesters. I wanted them to become problem solvers. Whatever problem they mentioned would be their problem, and who better than them to suggest the solution? To implement that solution was my word to them. The second rule was that the syllabus was non-negotiable. That had to be completed. So if they wanted to take time off one day, they would have to work extra time on another day to complete the syllabus. Finally, I reiterated that they would be treated with respect, but that they would have to treat teachers with respect in return. That meant that whatever they wanted to do, they would have to discuss with their teachers and get their agreement. I would be happy to facilitate that discussion if they wanted me to, but it was their responsibility. We could not impose anything on them without their agreement. And the same courtesy would apply to the teachers. Now everyone agreed. They did not know how it would work. They never did it before. In practice, in principle, it sounded nice, but in practice, they didn't know. I had an idea because I've done it before. But the teachers didn't know either. But after hearing all this mutual respect and so on, the teachers at least looked happier. In the next week's meeting, I produced a map of the school grounds on which I had drawn lines to divide it into squares. And I said to them, each square is for one class. It is your class Tota. Tota means garden. I said, this is your class garden. Please pick the square you want and write your class name in that square. And every month I'm going to have a competition and I will give a prize to the best Tota, to the best garden. Now, Kanyakumari is a fertile place and these children came from farmers' families. Almost overnight, the school got cleaned up, all the garbage disappeared, and gardens were planted everywhere except the sports field, which was my responsibility to maintain. The teachers also bought into this new spirit and their skepticism turned to enthusiasm. 2 or 3 weeks into the scheme, in the weekly meeting of the Students' Council, they said to me, we want permission to come to school on Sunday. So I said, sure, no problem, I give you permission to come on Sunday. But why do you want to come on Sunday? They said, we want to clean up these walls. They look very dirty, all the graffiti. And that graffiti is there, it was their work. That doesn't look nice. It looks very dirty, we want to clean it up. So I said, good, let's do it together. I said, I will also come. I will provide you with lime wash, with whitewash, and we will clean and paint the walls, and then we will all have lunch together. My treat. And they were delighted. And that's what we did. Things happened week after week. Change is gradual, even when it is driven strongly top down like I was forced to do. Exam results improved. They improved dramatically because both teachers and students started to take pride in their work. The cherry on the cake was that in the annual science fair, the AMM Arunachalam Higher Secondary School was placed in the second place in the whole state of Tamil Nadu. Now, let me answer the question which I am sure is in your minds. Did the Student Council create a revolution? Did I have a teacher rebellion on my hands? Did I get assaulted or even abused? None of them. None of the above. The reality is that people in authority live in fear. They think that they need to impose authority by force or the whole house of cards would collapse around their ears. The reality is that if you take people into confidence and you show them how following your method will help them to achieve their goals, you will have trouble holding them back. AMM Arunachalam Higher Secondary School's teachers and students were no different. They wanted their school to be the best in the state, but they were caught in the cycle of negativity. In negativity that a lot of us get caught in without realizing. My advantage was that I was new. I was not part of the morass of low self-esteem and deteriorating performance that they were stuck in. So I could institute changes more easily. The good thing was that once we had broken the ice, I had everyone's full cooperation and we never looked back. Now, let's see what happens in our schools. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to see what someone values, see what they measure. What do we measure? What are the metrics we use? Do we measure taqwa and akhlaq? Do we even know how to measure them? Let me give you a quick sketch of how to develop these metrics. Take the value you want to measure, in this case taqwa. Then ask, what are the behaviors which will show that the person is behaving with taqwa? In which situation is taqwa likely to be tested? What must the person do in such a situation? Then note these down. Ask children to maintain a journal. Teach them how to write a journal. And note down that what happens with them, both internally, the internal struggle, and externally. What was the internal struggle they had? And what were the thoughts and emotions and inhibitions that they had to overcome? What did they say or do? Finally, if it didn't go the way it should have, what was the learning? And what was the damage control they did? Problem solving. Let the parents and you, the teacher, also keep notes. Then periodically have a discussion with the child and his or her parents. It can be done collectively with many of them, individually. Focus on the positive and reward the child. Use the negative purely as a teaching moment, not to punish or criticize. Likewise for akhlaq. Remember, it's a collaborative effort which is worth the time and trouble it needs, because we are talking about transforming society and creating a legacy of honor for all concerned. As they say in Africa, it takes a whole village to raise a child. And it is worth it because that child will change the path of destiny for the world. You might say, is that all? Just two things? Only taqwa and akhlaq? I say yes. Because values drive behavior, behavior drives results. This was our slogan in GE. Values drive behavior, behavior drives results. Taqwa is the core value and akhlaq covers all behavior. The rest follows. Now you ask me, what about exams? How do we know what the children learned if we don't test them? I didn't say don't test them. I said test them for knowledge, not for random recall. They're human, remember? Not silicon chips. Here's how to test for knowledge and not random recall. Instead of asking, for example, them, state Archimedes' principle. Ask, please give one example where Archimedes' principle is applied and one example where you would apply it. If someone has forgotten Archimedes' principle, let them look it up. That doesn't matter because in real life they would be able to look it up. But how to apply it must come from them. Application is the real and only proof of learning. I want to close by asking you just one question. Ask yourself, do I want to change? Because everything is possible if you want to do it. So ask yourself, do I want to change? I rest my case. Thank you very much.